Assalamualaikum to our beloved lecturer, Madam Azrin, and our friends. Today we are going to present about North America. Let me introduce to you our team members, which is me, Nur Erina Ilyana binti Abdul Fattah, and my friend, Shasha Farisha binti Sufa. Now, let's take a look at the map of North America.
Now let's look at the introduction of North America. North America is the third largest continent on the earth, with 23 countries and dozens of possessions and territories. It includes all countries in the Caribbean and Central America, as well as Bermuda, Canada, Mexico, the United States of America, and Greenland, which is the world's largest island. North America is located in the planet's northern and western hemispheres, with the Arctic Ocean to the north, the Atlantic Ocean to the east, the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico to the southeast, and the Pacific Ocean to the west. Next, territory and human settlement of North America. The North America region is comprised of two countries, Canada and the United States. These two countries are among the world's largest countries in terms of area, have relatively low population densities, a wealth of resources, high material living standards. The very high living standards in Canada and United States attract migrants from all world regions who come to North America seeking prosperity and stability. Canada and the United States are closely linked in many ways.
Now we will move to the physical, geography, and human environment interactions of North America. North America has tropical to polar climates. The west coast climates of Canada and the United States are modified in their inland impact by the north-south mountain range. Although the U.S. Southwest is situated north of the Tropic of Cancer, the tropical arid climatic environment present in northern Mexico extends into the region. Southernmost Florida has tropical, humid conditions, and the Gulf Coast from Texas to Florida and the Atlantic coast as far north as the Virginia Tidewater have subtropical conditions that bring hot, humid summers with many thunderstorms and the annual threats of hurricanes. In northern Canada and Alaska, the climate is deeply Arctic in winter and has only short summers. The United States experiences more tornadoes each year than any other country. Distinctive ice-eroded landscapes are a relic features in high mountains and in northern Canada, while in the Midwest, the melting ice sheets left depositional features.
I will explain about the physical geography and human environment interaction in terms of mountains and plains. Western mountains. The western third of Canada and the United States is primarily composed of rock mountains consisting of several different elements. The highest peak in the region is Mount McKinley in the Alaskan Range, which is 6,194 meters. Canadian Shield. About half of Canada has the ancient rocks of the Canadian Shield at the surface. These are the oldest rocks in North America, and they contain major deposits of minerals ores. Covered by ice sheets during the last ice age, most of the soil was scraped from their surface. Deposits left by the melting ice sheets over the last 15,000 years are scattered and varied in nature and are often separated by large lakes that fill hollows gouged out by the ice. Next, interior lowlands. Lowlands with little relief dominate southern Ontario, the prairie provinces, and the central United States. Layers of sedimentary rock covers the sheer rocks, forming plateaus and escarpments such as that over which the Niagara Falls plunge. In the US Midwest and in Ontario, Canada, most of these rocks are covered by deposits from the melting ice sheet. Similar deposits occur over part of the Canadian prairies. Next, we have Appalachian Mountain System. East of the Mississippi lowlands, the Appalachian Mountains form a continuous chain of rolling hills and mountains extending from northern Georgia into the Adirondacks of New York, the Green and White Mountains of New England, and the Atlantic provinces of Canada. Few Appalachian mountain ridges exceed 2,000 meters. The rocks were deformed and uplifted by ancient plate tectonic movements and subsequently eroded. Major rivers and the Great Lakes. The physical and human geographies of North America are greatly affected by the region's surface hydrology, which is surface water drainage. In particular, the major rivers and the Great Lakes provide sources of fresh water and transportation routes. The Mississippi River was the basis of early interior transportation and continuous that role for bulk materials, though diminished in significance. The Ohio River was a transportation route at the heart of manufacturing development in the United States during the late 1800s.
Now that we have explored about mountain plains and major river and the Great Lakes, so let's move on to the natural vegetations and soils. The combinations of terrain and climate produce a range of natural vegetations and soils distributed in a north-south. The hard deserts of the southwest support drought-resistant varieties such as cactus and low shrubs. The subhumid Great Plains and prairies of the western Mississippi River Basin and south-central Canada had a natural vegetation of prairie grasslands. Eastward from tropical southern Florida to the northeast supported deciduous broadleaf forests. Now, move on to the natural hazards. The United States is affected by hurricanes, severe thunderstorms with accompanying tornadoes, lightning, hail, earthquakes, volcanoes, floods, blizzards, ice storms, and wildfires. Alaska are affected by extreme winter weather and earthquakes, meanwhile Hawaii are affected by continuous volcanic activity. Each hazard has a geographic area of greatest impact. Hurricanes threaten the Midwest and Southern Atlantic coast and Gulf Coast states in late summer and fall, when water temperatures are warmest. While tornadoes occur in plain states, the Mississippi Valley and Florida always have river floods following the spring melting of snow on the surrounding hills or heavy summer rains. All regions of the United States and West experience flash flooding. Lightning occurs in southern parts of the United States and in Florida. Upper plain states, the Midwest and the Western Mountains, and the northeast coast of the United States are affected by winter storms. Earthquakes and volcanoes are most common along the west coast from Alaska to California. The rising of the North American plate and the East Pacific plate causes horizontal displacement along the San Andreas Fault, resulting in frequent earthquake activity. Because of its location in the northern hemisphere high latitudes, Canada is less affected by most of the natural hazards that plague the United States.
Next, we have regional environmental issues. The emphasis on expansion and economic growth led to many environmental challenges in Canada and the United States before the era of concern that developed through the 1900s. The plowing of subhumid grasslands in western Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas resulted in the Dust Bowl disaster of the 1930s, in which winds blew away the dried finer soil particles and left piles of sand behind. Water from aquifers and the Colorado River facilitated the expansion of farming into arid areas of the southwestern United States. As southwestern populations grew, competition and controversy erupted between local states over the use of fresh water and the depletion of groundwater resources. Population settlement in arid areas where natural burning cycles frequently occur in the vegetation presents a growing hazard. Wildfires are increasingly affecting populated areas such as the Los Angeles Basin in southwestern California, where businesses and homes may be consumed by fire in a matter of minutes. Cities like Washington, D.C., Baton Rouge, and Los Angeles become plagued by smoke and high concentrations of ground-level ozone generated from the exhaust gases of increasing numbers of vehicles
Now
and
let's
thermal
move
power
on to the
plants.
regional culture
Acid
history.
rain derived
Regional
from power
culture
plant
history can be
emissions,
divided into
particularly
five, which are
along
the
the Ohio
emergence of a
River
region,
Valley,
wealth of
affected
natural
trees and
resources,
caused rivers
Native
and lakes
Americans,
downwind
European settlers, and
in the
human
northeastern
resources.
United States and eastern Canada to become more acidic.
Now let's move on to the regional culture history. Regional culture history can be divided into five, which are the emergence of a region, wealth of natural resources, Native Americans, European settlers, and human resources.
Let's take a look at the emergence of a region. The indigenous peoples of North America live in societies based on agriculture, hunting, trading, and the local communal sharing of resources. Global connections begin with the exploration of the region by various European interests. The indigenous Americans throughout the region were overwhelmed by the cultural hegemony or forced conversion of their social customs to the vastly different technologies and social tenets of the Europeans. North America became a series of colonies and occupied territories governed by the French, Spanish, British, Dutch, Russians, and Swedish. The British became the dominant power by the mid-1700s. Canada achieved a degree of independence through the British North America Act in 1867, while maintaining legal ties to Britain until 1982 when it gained control of its constitution. Today, Canada is a fully independent country that enjoys membership in the Commonwealth of Nations. Next, Native Americans. Indigenous people or Native Americans is the first nation in Canada that lived in North America before 1500 centuries. They live in hierarchically structured ethnic groups, commonly called tribes, adapted in culture and distribution to the physical conditions of terrain and climate.
Still in the regional culture history, the next point is wealth of natural resources. The first point is the primary product and new lands. In the 16,000s and 17,000s, the long, warm summers of the expanding coastal plains southward from New York encouraged commercial farming of subtropical crops such as tobacco, sugarcane, rice, and indigo, and later cotton. Slave labor combined with favorable climate and soil conditions enabled planters to sell crops to Europe, pay investors, and pocket or reinvest the proceeds. After achieving complete independence in 1783, the United States tripled its land area by 1815, purchasing land from France and Spain and acquiring the western third through negotiations and force of arms. The Homestead Act of 1862 provided families with low cost or even free farmland. Although the land was free, many people noticed that there were numerous costs associated with the move and the establishment of farms. The second point is Lower Canadian changes. West of Great Lakes, there was a little settlement in an area that was still largely administered by the Hudson Bay Company, which was founded in 1617 by a Royal British charter to oversee the development of nearly one-third of modern-day Canada. The space remained the domain of Native Americans and isolated groups of French settlers attempting to avoid British rule. The Hudson Bay Company began competing with American Indians for land along the lower Columbia River. Next is resources for U.S. manufacturing. Americans to establish their own manufacturing industry, providing goods that were at first not obtainable from Britain. Textiles, metal goods, and leather goods were among the first industries to develop. By 1850, the coal in eastern Pennsylvania and the Pittsburgh area had largely replaced charcoal in the iron and steel industries, sparking further industrial revolutions. Furthermore, railroads linked the mines of the western mountains to the eastern economic and political core. The mining of gold, silver, and then copper and zinc in the new western lands provided capital for further development and widened the scope of metal industries.
Next, we have European settlers. Several European countries began to settle the region as early as the 1500s, including Britain, France, the Netherlands, Russia, Spain, and Sweden. Sales of tobacco back in England attracted more settlers and led the British government to take over the lands as a crown colony.
The last regional culture history is human resource. The new people, the new skills is referring to the immigrants from the Northwest Europe that brought European cultural traditions and individual skills and initiative. Move on to the education and technology. The United States established compulsory educations much earlier than European countries. In the late 1800s, they began to focus on technology transfer by establishing engineering and farming universities in many states. Next is management and manufacturing. Americans achieved economies of scale by building larger factories for increased output. Horizontal integrations occurred when financiers purchased several producers of the same product, giving the new owners a large share of total goods productions and allowing them to set market prices. Vertical integrations took this process further by uniting the producers of product inputs with the product manufacturer in a single corporate structure. Canada began the process of becoming a major industrial country in late 1800s. Canada became a dominion within the British Empire with increased responsibility for its own affairs. With that, Canadian leaders began to integrate their vast country. The next subtopic is world roles. The United States is uniquely positioned due to its political, economic, and military prowess. Canada and the US are part of the G8, which is an economic discussions forum of the world's 8 most materially wealthy countries. Next is the United States and the United Nations UN Security Council. The United States enjoys an especially distinctive role as the host country of the UN. The purpose of the Security Council is the maintenance of international peace and security. Next is the good, the bad, and the ugly of globalization. There are countless global connections in communications, the media, transportations, politics and diplomacy, athletic competitions, entertainment, recreations, and leisure and business travel. Example of the positive relationship between the United States and Canada is the Space Shuttle program under the wing of the US National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and the flight path of shuttle missions. And the negative sides between the United States and Canada is that protesters argue that the WTO favors materially wealthy countries such as the United States and Canada over more impoverished countries, and that WTO policies hurt laborers around the world. The last point is global role of the regional economy. Global economic power began when US corporations expanded abroad after World War II during the economic recoveries in Europe and East Asia, and in the context of Cold War competitions in developing countries. After 1950, the United States established a huge lead in the initial development and use of computers, although Western Europe and especially Japan now challenge this economic and technological superiority.
Next, NAFTA. What is NAFTA? NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement, and it was implemented in 1994 to encourage trade between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. The goals of NAFTA is to reduce or eliminate tariff on imports and exports between the 3 participating countries, creating a huge free trade zone.
Next, I will talk about the United States.
The United States of America, one of North America's 2 subregions, dominates the latitudes of continental North America. Metropolitan areas of the United States house the majority of the country's transportation and communications connections, the larger manufacturing facilities, corporate headquarters, and financial and business services. Some 85% of U.S. real estate value occurs in the 2.5% of the country's land that is occupied by urban areas. The United States market economy, which is the world's largest, significantly influences economic activity across the globe. The United States remains a global leader in high technology and is the world's entrepreneurial leader. Next, the problem of affluence in the United States. The country's material wealth does not reach all within its borders. Those with advanced educations or double income families continue to garner greater material wealth, while those who are located in impoverished regions or places with fewer educational opportunities struggle to acquire the basic necessity for nutrition, shelter, and healthcare. Increasing gap between the materially wealthy and materially poor. The materially poor areas of many inner cities have lower quality buildings and services such as education and healthcare because of the inability of small jurisdictions with predominantly poor populations to support such services. Congregation and segregation. The income and material wealth gaps are often linked to perceived ethnic and racial differences. Many choose to congregate with those of similar socio-economic standing and cultural taste in trendy inner city areas or suburban neighborhoods. Such segregated groups often occupy inner city areas that contain high proportions of African Americans or Hispanic people and have poor access to high-quality education and job opportunities. Next, the economic development of the United States. Commercial farming basis. Commercial farming regions develop as the combination of natural resources, climate, land, soils, water, and economic factors lead to areas of specialization. Manufacturing becomes central. Manufacturing developed from local craft, pottery, smithing, weaving in the early 1800s in southern New England, New Jersey, and eastern Pennsylvania. It was based mainly on water mill power and produced metal goods, textiles, and leather goods. Regional politics. Uneven development reflected the concentration of capital investments in some regions and cities rather than in others. Tennessee Valley Authority, one of the few federal programs designed to stimulate economic growth in lagging regions. TVA was initially viewed as a possible model for action in other regions, but the dominant political views in the United States were against government-funded regional aid. The huge investments in hydroelectricity and other forms of inexpensive electrical power generation in the Tennessee Valley provided a basis for economic growth and population growth. The main achievement of the Appalachian Regional Commission, ARC, established in 1965 was to make available to this region the many federal grant aid financial packages, particularly in the late 1970s. In the 1980s, the administration of President Ronald Reagan reduced ARC's funding and effectiveness. Next, urban landscape. Industrial and commercial cities. New central business districts, CBDs, where shops, banks, and other financial services became concentrated, were easily accessible by streetcar to and from the industrial areas and leafy suburbs. By 1920, American cities often evolved into a concentric patterns of urban zones around the CBD, with poorer housing in inner suburbs and more affluent zones beyond. Some of the inner city areas house distinctive, segregated groups such as Slavic or Jewish people in areas that become known as ghettos. Post-1945 cities. New federal roads linking major cities followed by the interstate highway system established in 1956 made greater mobility possible and encouraged suburban housing and commercial development. Post-industrial cities. The term H city was coined for new, exurban developments relying primarily on a car and truck transport and secondarily on air travel. H cities includes large developments of shopping malls, offices, warehouses, and factories located on the edge of major metropolitan areas. Gentrification. Gentrification is the movement of higher income families and individuals into materially poor areas of inner cities, leading to the physical and economic improvement of property and potentially dramatic changes in the quality of life in the districts affected. It was first noticed in British cities in the early 1970s and is now common in urban centers of both the United States and Canada. These are the regions of the United States: New England, Megalopolis, Manufacturing Belt, Appalachia US Heartland, Midwest and Great Plains, the South, Western Mountains, Pacific Coast, Alaska, and Hawaii. Now, let's look at the current issues in the United States. Gender inequality. In terms of poor medical care, in addition to limited access to contraception, women overall receive lower quality medical care than men. This is linked to other gender inequality reasons such as a lack of education and job opportunities, which results in more women being in poverty. They are less likely to be able to afford good health care. There's also been less research into diseases that affect women more than men, such as autoimmune disorders and chronic pain conditions. Other than that, in terms of lack of employment equality, most economies in the United States give women only 3/4 the rights of men. And last but not least, women are still grossly underrepresented in government and the political process. This means that certain issues that female politicians tend to bring up, such as parental leave and childcare, pensions, gender equality laws, and gender-based violence, are often neglected.
Next, we have Canada.
Now, back with me, I will explain about Canada. Canada have large size and vast resources. Canada contains within its borders a vast variety of geographic features. The country's landform structure can be considered as a vast basin more than 3,220 miles in diameter. The Canadian Shield occupies about half of the total area of the country and is centered on Hudson Bay. The shield consists of some of the world's oldest rocks, which were folded by mountain building movements and cut down by erosion until the area was reduced almost to a plain. The largest mountains is Vancouver Island and Haida Gwaii. In the far north, the main mountains groups are the Richardson, Mackenzie, Celine, and Pelly Mountains. Canada is rich in mineral resources, and the region is a major source of lead, zinc, copper, and gold. Its eastern fringes contain coal deposits. Next, I will explain about possible independence of Quebec. In the 1990s, a substantial minority of independence-seeking people in Quebec attempted to secede from Canada. An independent Quebec would serve a direct ground contact between the Atlantic provinces and the rest of Canada. The Atlantic provinces might look south if the Quebec Rift occurs. Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and to a lesser degree New Brunswick are developing tourist industry in an attempt to replace lost components of the economy. Nova Scotia has a well-structured and geographically comprehensive tourist industry covering all parts of the province. New jobs in the region may be found in retail, hotel, and restaurant services. Next slide is relationship with the US. Canadians enjoy many of the benefits of affluence and national security because of their close integrations with the American economy and defenses. Canada has a history of military alliance and cooperations with the United States. Both of the countries work together to maintain a line of radar warning stations facing the Soviet Union across the Arctic Ocean during the Cold War. United States-Canada Free Trade Agreements of 1987 to 1988 which eliminated most tariff and trade barriers, was the first joint formal open trade relations. Not only involved in political and economic, the two countries have integrated forms of entertainment. Now I will explain about Canada cultural life. Canadian culture is a mixture of British, French, and American influences, all of which blend and sometimes compete in every aspect of cultural life, from filmmaking and writing to cooking and playing sports. In 1971, Canada adopted multiculturalism as official national policy, and the federal government now gives support to various ethnic groups and assistance to help individuals participate fully in Canadian society. Canada culture is underpinned by its tolerance, respect, and community orientation. Canadians are generally individualistic, yet they also emphasize and value everyone's contributions to their community. Now I will explain about the economic sector in Canada. The major sector in Canada is agriculture, forestry, and fishing. First, I will explain about the agriculture sector. Agriculture employs less than 4% of the Canadian labor force. However, it is vital to the national economy, producing large volume of foods for both the domestic and export markets, and providing raw materials for food processing, wholesale, and retail industry. The product produced is wheat, oilseeds, cattle grazing, crops and livestock, grain corn, soybeans, white beans, fruits, and vegetables. The second sector is forestry. Almost half of Canada's land area is covered with forests, the accessible portions of which provide abundant resources for lumber, pulp, and paper. Forest products form a larger part of Canada's export trade than do the combined export of farms, fish, and mineral products. Canada is the world leader in the export of pulp and paper, and also export large amounts of softwood lumber, mostly to the United States. British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec are the leading provinces in the production of forest products. The last major sector in Canada is fishing. Canada has rich fishing grounds of both the Atlantic and the Pacific coast. The parts of the continental shelf with the shallowest water are known as fishing banks. There is plankton, on which fish feed, thrive because the sunlight penetrates into the seafloor. On the Pacific coast, the continental shelf is very narrow, but numerous mountain streams are suitable for salmon spawning. Furthermore, in the rivers of the far north and in the Arctic Ocean, there are abundant fish on which large numbers of indigenous people depend for food. Lastly, overfishing and pollution depleted the fish resources in southern Canada significantly after the mid-20th century. Indeed, in 1992, the Canadian government imposed a moratorium on cod fishing with disastrous effects for employment along the East Coast. Canada has 5 regions, which is Atlantic Province, Central Canada, the Prairie Provinces, the West Coast, and the Northern Territories. Now we are at the last part of the discussions. The current issue in Canada is the rights of Indigenous peoples. Long-standing and systemic discriminations against Indigenous peoples persist across Canada. The water supplied to many First Nation communities on lands known as reserve is contaminated, hard to access, or at risk due to faulty treatment system. Furthermore, the poor water and sanitation conditions have a disparate and negative impact on at-risk populations, including children. Climate change is also contributing to a growing problem of food poverty and related negative health impacts of Indigenous peoples in Canada. Warming temperatures and increasingly unpredictable weather are reducing the availability of Indigenous peoples' traditional food sources and increasing the difficulty and danger associated with harvesting food from the land. As a result, households must supplement their traditional diet with more purchased food. But healthy foods, such as fruit and vegetables, are cost prohibitive in remote areas. The harmful impacts of climate change that indigenous populations in Canada are experiencing point to more devastating impacts in the future. Unfortunately, the federal, provincial climate change policies have largely ignored the impacts of climate change on First Nations right to food. Lastly, the food subsidies and health resources that could have counter current and projected impacts are often not available, insufficient, or do not reach those most in need.
That's all from us. Thank you.